Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Top Score Writing's live lesson number 6 for the middle school grades. My name is Mrs. Jones, and I will be your instructor for today's lesson. Now, we have been hard at work with our Gold Rush and Moon essays, but the past few lessons, we have taken a break from working on our complete essays and have instead focused on our elaborative techniques. Now, these are the elaborative techniques that we will use to write our middle paragraphs. In our previous lesson, we focused on learning how to quote evidence and how to write a clear and complete citation or reference to our source. Today, we are going to learn how to paraphrase evidence from the text and then respond to both our quoted evidence and our paraphrased evidence with our own thoughts and ideas. So this week, we've been working on the pieces of a middle paragraph. Next week, we're going to start putting those pieces together and writing our complete middle paragraphs for both the Gold Rush and Moon essays. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so in our very last lesson, which was on Tuesday, we talked about how to quote evidence. We talked about how quoting is when we take information directly from the text and we copy it into our essay. Now, a quote is more than just the copied sentence or sentences from the source. A quote must also be accompanied by a reference. So this is where we tell our reader where the information is from. We can't just take a sentence from an article and put it in our essay without telling our reader where that particular sentence or that bit of information came from. So let's take a look at a complete quote with a reference now. The quote says, "The term 49er refers to the year 1849, when over 90,000 people went to California to seek their fortune." Now, that is the exact sentence that we took from our source text. At the beginning of this quote, you will see there is a reference. And this example is referencing with EBT, which, as a quick reminder, stands for evidence-based terminology. Our EBT phrase is "as stated by the author," and then we have included the title of this specific article, The Gold Rush. So our complete quote with reference sounds like this. "As stated by the author of The Gold Rush, the term 49er refers to the year 1849, when over 90,000 people went to California to seek their fortune." So again, we have our reference at the beginning of this sentence that includes an EBT phrase according to the author. And then we have named our source in a specific way. We've included the title. After that, you will see the sentence that is copied directly from the source. Now, don't forget, we must always use quotation marks surrounding the information that has been taken from the source text. So the opening quotation mark or the beginning quotation mark is found in front of the very first word that we copied, and that is "the." And then the closing quotation mark is found after the very last word that we copied, which is "fortune." So make sure to pay attention to where the quotation marks go whenever you are quoting. Now, our goals for today are to learn how to paraphrase information from the text in our text-based informative or expository essays. And also, we're going to discuss how we can respond to or elaborate on the evidence that we have included in our middle paragraphs. So last week, when we were first introducing elaborative techniques, we looked at that color-coded essay. We talked about how our middle paragraph should be a mixture or a balance of quoted evidence, paraphrased evidence, and our own thoughts and ideas. Do you remember when we looked at that color-coded essay? We talked about how there was approximately the same amount of blue, green, and pink in each middle paragraph. Well, now we're just breaking those elaborative techniques apart. So today we're going to begin by first focusing on how to paraphrase evidence. Again, this is one of those types of elaborative techniques that you will use when you are writing your A and B sentences in the middle of your paragraphs. So what is paraphrasing? Have any of you ever heard of that before? I bet as middle schoolers, you sure have. Paraphrasing simply means when you read something and then you restate it using your own words. It's like you almost summarize what you've read. The tricky part about paraphrasing is that you must restate the same information that the author wrote. However, you have to do it with your own words. You can't use any or hardly any of the author's same words. So you have to find a way to explain it in your own language. Now, even though we are going to be using our own words to write about this information from the text, we're not copying it like we were with quoting, the ideas, the information, those still come from the sources, right? So even though we're using our own language to explain what we read about, we are still sharing information that came from the source. So we must still reference or cite our source in our middle paragraphs. So anytime you paraphrase, you will also include a citation or a reference to where that information came from. Sounds simple, right? I know y'all can do this. Now, one more handy rule to keep in mind is that you could paraphrase one sentence from the article in your middle paragraph, or sometimes you might read a whole paragraph in the source text and then paraphrase that whole paragraph. Sometimes you might try to paraphrase 2 or 3 or 4 paragraphs at one time. It is okay to paraphrase different amounts of text. So sometimes you'll be paraphrasing one sentence from an article, sometimes multiple sentences, sometimes a paragraph, sometimes multiple paragraphs. So now let's jump into practicing paraphrasing. We are going to be using the Gold Rush text set. Now, if you have this handy, go ahead and pull it out. But if you don't worry about it. I am going to show you every snippet of text that you will need today through this PowerPoint presentation. If you have the text set, it might just be handy to get it out though, because then you could read the text from your printed materials versus off of the screen. All right, let's take a look at source 1 in our Gold Rush text set. Specifically, I want everyone to look at paragraph number 2. I am going to show you how you can paraphrase one paragraph. So this is your chance to be watching and listening and learning, because in just a moment, you're going to get a chance to paraphrase on your own. So let's read paragraph 2 together. When people think of gold, one of the most common descriptions is a gold nugget. Gold nuggets are formed when a large piece of gold separates from a rock. The gold then gets carried into a stream or river. The water tumbles the gold, which results in the nugget forming smooth, rounded edges. The gold settles at the bottom of a river because of the weight of the nugget. When other gold nuggets settle in the same area, it is called a placer deposit. All right, so now we are going to paraphrase paragraph 2. So the first thing I need to ask myself is, what is this whole paragraph about? Then I want to ask myself, what are the most important parts of this paragraph? Because when I'm paraphrasing, I am not going to be able to include every single detail I read. I'm going to have to decide what is the most important part of this paragraph that I want to share in my essay. So reading paragraph 2, there's a lot of really great information. Most of the information is explaining how gold nuggets are formed, right? They talk about how gold is typically part of a rock, but it breaks free. Then they talk about how it gets carried into a stream or a river. And then because the water is tumbling the gold over and over, all of those rough edges get smoothed down and it becomes this nice round nugget. And once, or a nice round shape, I should say. And then once it becomes this nice round shape, then typically we call that a gold nugget. And it talks about how the weight of the gold is so heavy. Gold is heavier than a lot of other materials, so it tends to sink to the bottom of a river. Okay, so I think I'm going to focus my paraphrasing on how gold is formed, how gold nuggets are formed. So here is an example of a paraphrase. Here's an example of paraphrasing of paragraph number 2. You will see that written in blue. So my paraphrasing of paragraph number 2 sounds like this. When pieces of gold break off of a rock, they are carried downstream. The friction of the water slowly stands the rough edges of the gold down until the gold becomes nice and smooth. So do you see how I restated what paragraph 2 was mostly about? But I did it using my own words. When we are paraphrasing, it's very important to think about synonyms. Synonyms, as I'm sure you all know, are words that mean the same thing. So for example, in the text, when it talks about how their gold gets carried into a stream or river, I rephrased that in my paraphrase example by talking about how the rock of gold, the piece of gold, is carried downstream. In the text, they say the water tumbles the gold. Now, in my paraphrasing, I said the friction of the water. Those mean the same thing, but they are stated in a different way. In the text, they talk about how the nugget is formed into a smooth, round edges. In my paraphrasing, I talk about how the rough edges of the gold are slowly worn away until it becomes nice and smooth. So again, I'm using some of my own language to restate what the paragraph was mostly about. There's two tricks to paraphrasing. Number one, you're going to need to think about synonyms. How can I explain the same thing I read about using different words? Another trick is to change the order in which the information is presented. So if a paragraph talks about, let's say, topic A first and then topic B, in your paraphrasing, you could first state topic B and then topic A. You could switch the order in which the topics are presented. While switching the order, you could also use synonyms to explain the same topics. Now, as we mentioned at the very beginning, paraphrasing is still taking information from the text and including it in your essay, even though we're not quoting it, right? So we must still reference. In purple, you will see the same paraphrased piece of information. However, now it includes a reference to the source. This complete paraphrased example sounds like this. According to the passage, The Gold Rush, when pieces of gold break off of a rock, they are carried downstream. The friction of the water slowly sands the rough edges of the gold down until the gold becomes nice and smooth. So I have added a citation to the same piece of paraphrased information. And that's it. That's how we paraphrase text. So now you're going to try. Go ahead and grab a blank piece of paper. If you have your text set handy, please read paragraph number 4. If you don't have your text set handy, that's okay. You can read paragraph 4 off of my screen. Please read this paragraph to yourself and then go ahead and attempt to paraphrase what you've read. Don't forget, you need to include a reference or a citation. So the title of this article is Source 1, The Gold Rush. You can cite using the source number, the title, or the paragraph number. I'll give everybody a moment or two to complete their paraphrasing now. All right, everyone, I'll give you one more moment to finish up this paraphrasing, and then we'll discuss. All right, everyone, so let's go ahead and review. What was this paragraph about? Well, it's mostly about how gold was discovered at a lumber mill that was owned by James W. Marshall. James W. Marshall was working for a California pioneer named John Sutter, who thought that California had some potential to be an agricultural center for the United States. And when Sutter discovered the gold, or when Marshall discovered the gold while working for Sutter, Sutter decided he wanted to keep it a secret. Because if everybody knew that gold had been discovered in California, then they would have been flooded by people. So he tried to keep it a secret for as long as possible. And really, it only took a few months before the newspapers on the East Coast discovered his amazing discovery. So now I'm going to show you an example of a correct or complete paraphrase. Please keep in mind, this is just one example. There are a million different ways we could have paraphrased this paragraph. So yours is not going to sound exactly like mine. What I want you to check, though, is that what you wrote is about the main idea of paragraph 4. It focuses on the most important parts. And I would also love for you to check that you used different words than paragraph 4 used. You use synonyms when paraphrasing. So my example is as follows. The text, The Gold Rush, states that James W. Marshall discovered gold on January 24th, 1848, which soon caused news to spread all around the US about the discovery of gold in California. So you can see that I have done some switching of the order of topics in my paraphrasing. I stated who discovered it before I stated the date. That's flip-flopped from the way the source did it. I also used my own words. I used synonyms to talk about how the news about the discovery of gold spread to the East Coast. So again, just one example, but you can check that you focused on the main topic, that you used your own words, you use synonyms in your paraphrasing, and finally, please check that you did include a reference or a citation to the source. All right, now we're going to play a game. Are you ready? Okay, on your paper, I want you to number 1 through 4. So just 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, we are going to play a game where I'm going to read you a piece of evidence, and then I'm going to read you 4 examples of paraphrasing. Some of these are good examples, some of these are bad examples. So if they are a good example, you can write yes next to that number. If they are a bad example, meaning they did not paraphrase correctly, you can write no. Are you ready? So you're going to write yes, good paraphrasing, or no, bad paraphrasing for every example. All right. The evidence or the text says, source 1, the state of Florida has mandated that all 6th through 8th grade students take the statewide writing assessment every year in April. Read that one more time to yourself. All right, you got it? Now think about what you know about paraphrasing. What do we know? It has to focus on the main idea. It has to use different language than the text uses, right? It has to use synonyms, and it has to include a reference or a citation. All right, let's evaluate some options. Number 1, students in middle school must take a state writing test once a year. Yes, that's a good example. No, it's a bad example. Number 2, source 1 states that middle schoolers are required to take a writing test every spring. Good? Bad. Number 3, at the end of the school year, all students in grades 6, 7, and 8 must take a test to show that they can write appropriately for their grade. Source 1. Good example, bad example. What do you think? Number 4, Florida has mandated that all 6th through 8th graders take a statewide, I always want to say statewide. Let's try this again. Number 4, Florida has mandated that all 6th through 8th graders take a state writing test every year in April. Good example, bad example. Okay, do you have yes or no written next to each number? Awesome. Let's go ahead and review. Number 1, thumbs down. That is a bad example. Who knows why number 1 is incorrect? It's missing a citation, isn't it? It doesn't have a reference to the source. Remember, when we paraphrase, we have to reference our source. Those are not our own thoughts and ideas, right? We didn't come up with that information. We got that from the source. So we have to give credit to where that information came from. So number 1 is a no, thumbs down. Number 2, source 1 states that middle schoolers are required to take a writing test every spring. Yes, thumbs up. Why? Well, it does include a reference or a citation, doesn't it? And it uses its own language. The source said students 6th through 8th grade. Well, number 2 rephrases that and says middle schoolers. Middle schoolers are the same as students in 6th or 8th grade, right? It's just stated in a different way. The source says they have to take the test in April. The paraphrased example says they could take the test in spring. That again is a way of stating the information in a different way. April and spring mean the same thing, don't they? But they're using different words. All right, number 3. At the end of the school year, all students in grades 6, 7, and 8 must take a test to show they can write appropriately for their own grade. Source 1. Thumbs up. That has a citation, right? It says source number 1 at the end. That's parenthetical citations. And this has restated the information using their own language. Number 4, Florida has mandated that all 6th through 8th graders take a state writing test every year in April. Major thumbs down. What's wrong with this one? Who knows? Everything's wrong with this one, right? It's missing a reference or a citation. And also they use the same words that the article used. They said mandated. Well, mandated is in the source. They said 6th through 8th graders. That's the same language the source text used. They said April in their paraphrasing. And again, April was used in the source. So number 4 is a bad example because they did not use their own language and they did not include a complete reference. All right, everybody, excellent job practicing paraphrasing. Now let's move on to our third type of elaborative technique. This is called own thoughts and ideas. So again, I want you to think back to last week when we looked at that color-coded essay. We talked about how the middle paragraphs, when we're writing those A and B sentences, they're going to be a mixture of evidence and our own thoughts and ideas about the evidence. Well, so far we've talked about 2 ways to include evidence: quoting evidence, paraphrasing evidence. Now we're going to talk about how we can include our own thoughts about the evidence. So this is when we are going to think critically about the evidence we put in our middle paragraphs. We're going to think about our A's and B's. We're going to think about our quotes and our paraphrases. And then we are going to share an inference, or we're going to draw a conclusion, or we are going to share our own thoughts about the evidence. Now, because our own thoughts are always about the evidence, then guess what? They come after the evidence. These own thoughts and ideas are directly connected to our quoted and paraphrased evidence, and they support our quoted and paraphrased evidence. The last tip I want you to remember is that our own thoughts and ideas, when we include them, should be at least 2 sentences in length, if not more. Because here's the thing. I don't want your own thoughts and ideas to be very basic, okay? I don't want you to say things like, that's cool, that's great, wow, that's so amazing, okay? That type of own thought and idea doesn't help anyone. Your own thoughts and ideas are supposed to help your reader understand the topic more. So if you draw a conclusion or make an inference, or you discuss why that evidence is important, you're helping your reader to understand more. If you just stick in your personal opinion or your personal feeling, that doesn't help the reader at all, does it? So that's so cool, that's so amazing. Those 1 sentence own thoughts and ideas are basic. Okay, we're striving for more in the middle school level. We really want to share our thought process with our reader. And in order to express an in-depth thought, in order to express it clearly, you're going to need to write at least 2 sentences. Otherwise, a 1-sentence own thought and idea tends to be rather basic. So always write 2 or more sentences when you are discussing or elaborating upon the evidence. So let's look at some examples. Here you see paraphrased evidence in green, followed by the writer own thoughts and ideas in pink. So the evidence is, during the gold rush, miners would go to deposit locations, which were called placer deposits, and pan to find large gold nuggets, says source 1. Now, the writer of this essay responds to this evidence by saying they wanted these big pieces to make jewelry with. This allowed them to make lots of money. So here is where the writer of the essay is thinking about, why would someone do this? Why would they go to the locations? Why would they look for these big gold nuggets? Like, what was the purpose? And the writer is sharing their thoughts about why someone would do this, what the purpose of it is. So their own thought and idea is in response to the paraphrased evidence. And you'll notice that it is 2 sentences in length, because if they had just wrote, they wanted these big pieces to make jewelry with, that would seem as though their own thought and idea was not very connected to the evidence. But by bringing in the reasoning behind the jewelry to make money, now the own thought and idea is about and in support of the evidence. Let's look at another example. Here you have quoted evidence in blue, followed by the writer's own thoughts and ideas. The quoted evidence says, he was going to sell the canvas for tarps, tents, and wagon coverings, states the author of the same text. Then the writer responds to this quote by saying, this was a great business to start. These items were essential to finding gold, so people were buying continuously from him. So this writer is drawing a conclusion about what they read, and they are remarking upon why they think it was such a great business decision to sell canvas for tarps, tents, and wagon coverings. Now, if you have your writer's notebook handy or you've been taking some notes during this live lesson series, go ahead and grab it now. This would be a great thing to jot down in your notebook. When you are writing your own thoughts and ideas, and remember, these are always going to be in response to quoted or paraphrased evidence, you can do one of the following. You could summarize what the author says. You could restate the quote or paraphrase in your own words using synonyms and definitions. Now, this is really only if your quote or paraphrase contains some domain-specific vocabulary, some higher order language that needed to be defined. So if your quote or paraphrase just contains everyday type language, words that your reader would know and understand, you would not want to define or explain what these words mean. However, if your quote or your paraphrased evidence used a word that the average reader would not know, for example, placer deposits, then you could go ahead and define what placer deposits mean when you're writing your own thoughts and ideas. So be careful with that one. You could always discuss why you included that particular piece of evidence. You should always have a reason why that quote is the one that goes into your middle paragraph. Does it support your topic? Does it illustrate your point? Is it giving an example of something? If you understand the reason you selected that evidence and why you put it in your middle paragraph, go ahead and explain that to your reader. You could elaborate on how the evidence proves or supports your topic. You could even agree or disagree with the evidence if you explain why. So I agree or I disagree is not sufficient. That would not be a good own thought and idea. I agree because blah, 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 or I disagree because of blah, 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 blah. Well, that would be an own thought and idea that is worth putting in your essay, because there you're actually explaining your thinking process. Remember, the thinking process is what we want. Your personal opinions, not so much. The own thoughts and ideas, a good rule of thumb is to check, do my own thoughts and ideas help my reader to understand this topic more? If they do, you're on the right track. All right, so I would love for everybody to practice on a blank piece of paper, coming up with an own thought and idea now in response to this quote. The quote is, in the article, Gold Rush Entrepreneurs, it states that once in California, he noticed that the miners needed sturdy work pants that could protect them from the elements and would not easily tear. Go ahead and jot down now 2 sentences or so that are your own thoughts and ideas about this quote. Maybe you want to talk about why he decided to do this, or why this is important, or how it connects to the development of the big businesses that erupted all over California. Remember, Gold Rush Entrepreneurs talked a great deal about the big businesses that grew during this time. When you're writing your own thoughts and ideas, do you need a reference or a citation? Whose own thoughts and ideas are these? Are these yours, or are they the author of an article? They're yours, right? So then no, you do not need a reference or citation. I'm going to give everyone a moment to go ahead and jot down their own thoughts and ideas now. All right, one more moment, everybody. Excellent. Okay, so if you're done, great. If you're not, that's okay. Great try. I appreciate everyone jumping in and giving it a shot. This is the first time some of you may have written your own thoughts and ideas. So I know this might be a unique way to think about writing, and it'll take some practice, but I know you'll get the hang of it. Let's go ahead and look at an example of an own thought and idea and also a non-example. Now, your own thought and idea is not going to sound like mine, and that is okay. There's tons of different ways we could have responded to the quoted evidence. My own thought and idea was, his product must have been very well made and popular, so much so that they are still being sold today, right? Because this was a course about Levi Strauss. We read about how he got his beginning selling the canvas for tarps and things of that nature. And then he saw how much miners needed really good pants, and he developed denim jeans. And then, as we know, Levi's are still sold in stores all across America today. So my own thought and idea was about how his products must have been very well made and popular, so much so that they are still being sold even now. A non-example of an own thought and idea would be, that's really cool. Right? That's the writer's own opinion. It does not help the reader to understand the topic or the information any better. So that would be a non-example. All right, we're going to do one more and then we will conclude today's lesson. So here is a quote that says, the author says in Gold Rush Entrepreneurs, the merchants demanded outrageously high prices. Prospectors had little choice but to pay. Now go ahead and draw a conclusion from this quote, or make an inference, or talk about why it's important. Okay, go ahead and write down 2 sentences now about this quote that will help your reader to understand the topic a little bit more in depthly. Okay, one more moment, everyone. All right, let's go over some examples now. And again, your own thoughts and ideas, of course, are going to sound different from mine. All of us should have unique own thoughts and ideas. So what I came up with is, most likely merchants were becoming just as rich as miners. Everybody moving to the area was buying from them. Therefore, profits were continuously being made. The opportunity to charge any amount, knowing the miners had no choice but to pay it, caused some merchants to act in a greedy and selfish manner. So in my own thoughts and ideas, I was making inferences. I was thinking about what I know and thinking about what I read. And from there, I was drawing some conclusions about the merchants' behaviors and perhaps why they chose to act in that manner. Now, a non-example would be, one time I had a lemonade stand. I sold lots of lemonade and I made lots of money. And let's talk about why that's a non-example. Some students would look here and they would say, oh, this is all about people selling something and making money, right? Well, one time I sold something and I made money. That own thought and idea, while I do see the connection, is a loose connection. It does not directly support the evidence. So although that quote may have reminded you about something in your own life, your own experience of selling lemonade at a lemonade stand does not support the topic. It does not help the reader to understand more about what they've read. So that would be considered a very loosely connected own thought and idea, and not something that we wanted would include in our text-based informative or expository essays. All right, everyone, excellent job today reviewing and practicing paraphrasing and own thoughts and ideas. So this week was all about breaking apart the middle of a paragraph and talking about each piece, right? So 2 weeks ago, we talked about topic sentences. This week, we talked about quoting, paraphrasing, and own thoughts and ideas. Well, next week, we are going to be writing the middle paragraphs of our essay. So now we're going to start putting together everything that we've learned, all of these individual skills, and utilizing them at one time. Great job today, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and I'll see you next Tuesday.